Institute India's NCII session on the road ahead for India-ASEAN ties. I'm Indrani Bagchi. I'm with the Times of India, and I will be your moderator for the evening. We have, as you see, an absolutely stellar panel, which makes my life and work incredibly easy. Just for a tiny housekeeping rule, if you could please put your phones on silent, that would be helpful.
Thank you.
India and ASEAN, as you know, have just celebrated 20 years together. In December, we had the India-ASEAN Commemorative Summit. I think the most visible part of the summit was the car rally that traversed several countries on its way to Delhi. We had 9 heads of state and government from the ASEAN countries out of 10, 1 vice president from the Philippines. The biggest takeaway from the summit, of course, was the services agreement and the FTA between India and ASEAN. But is that the only story? And we know that it isn't, because Asia is in the middle of a deep political, geopolitical, and economic flux. And you are no stranger to it all. We have the US pivot to Asia, which in many people's view need to be further clarified, need to be sharpened. We need to understand that a little more. What does that mean for all of us? What does that mean for China? What does that mean for ASEAN? And on the other side, we have China, the next superpower in the making. A China who many would say is more forthcoming, more, some would say, aggressive, but certainly much more present in the region, definitely economically and now much more so politically. In the last couple of years, we have seen territorial disputes rise in the region. We've seen disputes on the South China Sea. What does that mean for all of us? What does that mean for India? What does that mean for ASEAN? How does ASEAN handle the future? How does ASEAN handle the pressures of being ASEAN in the middle of the competing giants of the US and China? Will ASEAN have what is popularly known as the centrality of ASEAN? Will that survive? Or will everybody make a beeline for the nearest bilateral resolution on territorial disputes? To hear answers to all of this, and I hope we will see a lot of questions from the audience later, we have Ambassador Sati Lamba, who, as the Prime Minister's envoy to Afghanistan, Pakistan, needs absolutely no introduction. Neither does Ambassador Tommy Koh, who was former ambassador to the US for Singapore, gives a unique view to ASEAN's future and to India-ASEAN relations, which he has followed for a long time. Mr. Jamshid Godrej, who takes a much more pragmatic, shall we say, realist approach to India-ASEAN relations, being a premier private sector player, and Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, who has been Singapore's ambassador to Pakistan, Iran, and is now ambassador at large for Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
And is the only billionaire in the Singapore delegation.
And is the only, he is the only billionaire in the Singapore delegation. Well, there we go. To kick off the evening, I will invite Ambassador Tommy Koh to make his remarks. We will keep it at 5 minutes.
I will get him later.
We will keep it at 5 minutes of inaugural remarks per speaker. Maybe a little interaction later, and then we will open it up to the audience. We hope to see a lot of questions from the floor. Thank you. Ambassador Koh.
Thank you. For men from Singapore, we are used to working under women bosses. So I'm very pleased to work under the leadership of Indrani Bagchi. There is a fundamental cultural difference between Singapore and India. And the fundamental cultural difference is that, unlike Indian husbands, Singapore husbands are afraid of our wives. It's true. It's on the record. The media can report me.
We have also
You know, not you. No. Not you. And my good wife always advises me that when I speak in public, no matter how many points I have, please just make 3 points so that the audience will remember at least one of them. So in the 5 minutes that Indrani's given me, I'm going to share 3 points with you. My first point is that the relationship between India and the countries of Southeast Asia, which together form ASEAN, is grounded in history, in culture, and in many common values and customs. When you travel Southeast Asia and you see our great monuments, whether it be Angkor in Cambodia, Pagan in Myanmar, Wat Phu in Laos, Borobudur Prambanan in Indonesia, you see the legacy of the Indian civilization. Indonesia, which is a Muslim majority country, named its national airline Garuda. And the most popular entertainment in Indonesia is the wayang kulit, the shadow play. And what do the plays depict? They depict stories from Ramayana and Mahabharata. And my Indian friends here should know that in ASEAN, there's an annual Ramayana festival. So our connections with India are historical, but they are also alive. And I'm happy to say that it is alive even on the Indian side. We have a very distinguished member of parliament from Orissa with us. Is Mr. Panda here?
No.
Panda is not here. But in in Orissa, I don't know how many of you have been to Orissa. In Orissa, there's an annual festival called the Bali Jatra. And the Bali Jatra is an annual festival by the people of Orissa to pay homage and tribute to the Indian traders, sailors, explorers who for centuries have sailed from India to Southeast Asia. So our relationship is grounded on history, on culture, and on heritage. My second point is that this relationship between India and ASEAN faces no obstacle. You have no claims in Southeast Asia. There are no territorial claims by India in Southeast Asia. There are no contradictions of interest between India and Southeast Asia. So the pathways are open. And for this reason, in the last 20 years, we have begun to build a very substantive, comprehensive bond of friendship between India and ASEAN. Just to give you one example, our two-way trade 20 years ago was minuscule. But by last year, 2012, it was $75 billion US. And our ambition is that by 2015, we will hit $100 billion. There is also an increasing two-way flow of investment from India into ASEAN and ASEAN into India. There's a constant flow of business people, cultural people between India and ASEAN. So it's a trouble-free, mutually beneficial, a very good relationship. My third point. Like many Indians, Jawaharlal Nehru is one of my personal heroes. And when I was chairman of the National Heritage Board in Singapore, I proposed to the government of India and to my own government that let us put up a marker and a bus to honor the memory of Pandit Nehru, who in his lifetime had visited Singapore several times. So I was very happy that my dream came to pass when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and our former Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong unveiled a marker and a bust of Nehru. The next time you visit Singapore, please come and visit the Asian Civilizations Museum. And in front of the museum, by the Singapore River, you'll find this marker and a beautiful bust of Nehru. It is a symbol. It is a symbol of the friendship, not just between Singapore and India, but between ASEAN and India, because Nehru had tremendous influence on the anti-colonial struggle in Southeast Asia. And we, to this day, celebrate him for what he stood for, a secular leader who brought freedom and democracy to India. Nehru was also prescient, and I will abide by your time limit. In my remaining 1 minute, I want to quote to you something that Nehru said in 1947. In 1947, Nehru, speaking at the Asian Relations Conference here in India in March 1947, said, and I will just quote one sentence from the speech. Those contacts between India and your neighbors are being renewed, and the future is bound to see a closer union between India on the one side and Southeast Asia on the other. So I just want to conclude by saying that Nehru's dream has come true, and we should, on this happy occasion, celebrate the flourishing friendship between India and ASEAN, and in doing so, remember Nehru. Thank you.
Mr. Lamba, will you respond in a way?
Yes, I will try to continue. You know, Ambassador Tomiko, with whom I've had the privilege of last 5 years of co-chairing with him the India-Singapore Joint Dialogue, has a great capacity that in 3 points he covers everything. And so, in fact, makes it difficult for others to say something. That is, I think the important aspect here is that the gravity of power, in spite of the fact that some people think that the EU US proposed FTA might deflect it, the general prevalent view is that the power of gravity would shift to Asia and in the coming decades. And there, ASEAN has a role to play, a function to perform. And India's policy of Look East policy has actually now become a policy of engagement with the East. It's no longer just Look East, it's now engagement with the East. If you look at the history, it started in 92, where in 95 it became a full dialogue partners and annual summits for the last 10 years, and we had the 10 commemorative summit, where the vision statement actually gives you an idea of what the road ahead is. So I don't really have to stress those points which are included there. But one issue which Tommy mentioned, I like to I think I have it with me, and I like to mention, yes. This is India's efforts to preserve, protect, and ensure symbols of structure representing civilizational relations with ASEAN countries. And these are the Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the Borobudur and the Prambanan temples, which he mentioned in Indonesia, the Phu Wat in Laos, Bagan in Myanmar, Suk Toi Historical Park in Thailand, and Mai San in Vietnam. And India will be endeavoring in the coming years to see how it can help in redeveloping these important sites. As regards economic relations, Tommy very rightly mentioned that the present trade is 80 billion, and the target which has been set is 100 billion by 2015. It's not only achievable, but there's a possibility that it might even exceed that figure. So the the RCEP also, which is coming up, would add to the economic space which is being created. I think there are 2 or 3 points which are important in our relations with ASEAN. One is there is no conflict between us. 2, we add value to each other. And 3, our emphasis on energy security and food security. I think these 3 aspects are important in our going ahead with the ASEAN countries. This is what I would restrict my initial comments to.
Thank you, Mr. Lamba. You've been even more obedient. Mr. Pillai, would you like to take off from what Mr. Lamba said, but also looking forward to where India and ASEAN would be in, say, the next 10 years?
If you don't mind, Chairman, I like to go back a little bit. Being a contrarian by nature, I want to say something. I'm under strict rules from my fearless leader, Professor Tommy Koh, to restrict myself to the vision statement. But I want to go beyond the vision statement. What Tommy said about the ancient links, the civilizational links between India and Southeast Asia is absolutely correct, as far as all the records go. Now, my contrarian nature compels me to question why, in spite of that, when India got its independence, its gaze was towards the West and not towards Southeast Asia. Look-East policy came during Narasimha Rao's time. Before that, Southeast Asia did not exist except for Indonesia. Indonesia was being part of the non-aligned movement and sort of thing. But Indonesia was the first to desert India when the 1962 attack happened. And Sukarno is on record to say Indian Ocean should be renamed Indonesian Ocean. So what happened? Why is that? What was there? What was your asset, Southeast Asia? Why were you not spending time to cultivate this? I know an Indonesian company that was trying to trace the journey of Hanuman through Southeast Asia and into China. Now, India never thought of doing that. Why? Because you had a base which gave you a cultural sort of a bind with all the countries of Southeast Asia. You did not bother with it. Now, my question is, why should it have been so? Because it would have been much easier for you to build on your strength. And that is the links, all the temples that were mentioned. There. You go to Kedah, for instance, in Malaysia, you will find that the people are very much of Indian origin. You know, I don't want to go into the ancestry of Malaysian former Prime Minister, but I mean, he included. They're all of Indian origin.
He said he had only 2 spoonfuls of Indian blood in him.
Well, his grandfather was from Kerala. Maybe he left only 2 spoonfuls. I don't know. You know, but that is the state of affairs. Now, if I may hazard a guess, the leadership of India after independence was significantly socialist, eastward, westward looking at Soviet Union and so on. The Southeast Asian countries were seen as lackeys of the imperialists. So there, of course, there was CETO, which was not a very good organization, but they did not try to separate some of these institutions from the individual countries, which is something they should have done. Now we have slowly reversing that situation. And we have a situation where ASEAN and India celebrated its 20th anniversary, as our chairman mentioned, chair lady mentioned, sorry. And a vision statement had been sort of adopted on 20th December 2012, where centrality of Asia has been recognized by India, and India has been accepted as a strategic partner of ASEAN. This is a great achievement, but it took a very long route to reach there. It could have been, my own view is that if India at its birth recognized its past, it could have actually shortened this trip. Today, India's influence in Southeast Asia, while fairly, is problem-free and so on, but compared to some of the other countries who exert influence, I think India's influence is not very significant. It will take much longer time for India to get back to what it was. In the times that we were talking about where India's civilization links were very strong, even at that time, many of the countries paid tribute to China. But culturally, India was a stronger one. Even Thailand, the Thai people are a Chinese people, superimposed with Indian culture, so that the Indian language was made tonal. So when you hear it, you will hardly know what it is. For instance, when you hear, you must have heard of the famous Thai university, Thammasat University. You don't know what, that's an Indian word. It's actually Dharma Shastra, University of Liberal Arts. The Agricultural University, Kasesat, Krishi Shastra. So much of vocabulary is taken. But the Thais were clever. They learned to count in Chinese, but everything else in Sanskrit. So it is a fascinating part of the world, which for quite some time, I'm sorry to say, and I hope I'm wrong, and you'll contradict me, India neglected. But now I think we are coming back on stream, and I think it is good for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pillai. Mr. Godrej, what does the future look like?
Well, I want to reminisce a bit about my travels in Southeast Asia from a business point of view. When I first went to Southeast Asia, it was to Malaysia. We had a factory there from the mid-60s. And what was amazing at that time was that Santa Cruz Airport in Bombay was a much better airport than the airport in Kuala Lumpur. And so, if you look at this span of time, where India actually started from and where it is today and where ASEAN has moved, it is, I think, this rate of change that has made a huge difference. I think the main point that what was amazing to me at that time was that we were Indian investors in ASEAN, and we have many investments all over ASEAN. And it was that we were bringing in technology, we were bringing in capital, we were actually able to do extremely well in Southeast Asia for a long, long time before they kicked in their policies, which then pushed us out. And things like the Bhumiputra policy, etc., and the protectionist policies that are there, mostly today. That's what really, but we went at a time when it was very free. And I think my real message on the, on our approach to that area should be that we have seen the benefits of openness. We have seen the benefits of trade and investment, and we need to build on that. ASEAN is, to my mind, a huge business opportunity for India. We have the type of developing countries in ASEAN are very similar in many ways to the way India has developed. And I think that is another huge benefit, aside from all the historical and the cultural and the geography of where we are. I think this huge benefit is something that we have just not built on adequately. And my feeling is that if we can focus on ASEAN as a market, but individual countries really are the markets. I think ASEAN is a grouping, but the market is not just ASEAN. The market is Indonesia, it's Malaysia, it's Singapore, it's Thailand, etc. But I think if we look at it from that point of view, we will do well. I think that almost every benefit that we see of having learned how to do business in India is completely translatable today within ASEAN. We see the same type of development strategies. We see the same trajectories. We see the same way of doing business. The cultural differences are not so much of a hindrance. It's actually more about understanding what makes market works. And our experience of that in India has actually been very beneficial. So I think that we really need to look at ASEAN, aside from all the, our historical links, we need to look at it from that point of view.
Thank you so much, Mr. Godrej. That was, I would like to kick off with the first question to Ambassador Tomiko, which is that the ASEAN community is scheduled to be in place by 2015. What, if you would tell us, what would be the shape or the contours of the ASEAN community, and how or what kind of a place does India have in engaging with that community? What would be the 5 things that we should be looking at?
5 things.
Yes.
But my wife limited me to 3. but first, can I have your permission to quarrel with Gopinath Pillai?
No.
No?
No.
Because I think that he was. No, but he was not fair to India. No, it's not.
We'll do it for you.
No, but I think I need to speak because there's a myth widely held in India that there's no freedom of speech in Singapore, and that all Singaporeans hold the same view. So I want to demonstrate to you that this is not true. I think Gopinath Pillai is not fair to India. When India became independent, Nehru convened the Asian Relations Conference in Delhi in 1947.
Before independence.
Before independence, 49, right? And he had a really visionary proposal. He wanted to promote the idea of the Federation of Asian States, And Nehru helped to bring about the Bandung Conference in 1954, So he did not neglect Asian. And India championed the cause of independence of Indonesia and against the Dutch. He also championed the cause of independence in Burma, in Myanmar today. So, but the Cold War intervened, and many other things happened that prevented Nehru from pursuing his dream. So it's taken time for India to come back to Nehru's original vision. Okay, to answer Indrani's question, I want to just tell you the happy story that in 2007, I was one of the 10 people who appointed to draft the ASEAN Charter. Yeah. And it was really a historic opportunity for the 10 of us to try to understand the aspirations of the ASEAN people as well as the realities, and to capture in this founding document the ASEAN Charter. Under the ASEAN Charter, we envision that we will make an important transition from being an association, which we are now, to being a community in 2015. What does that mean? There are 3 pillars. There's a political security pillar, social cultural pillar, and an economic pillar. So I will just take the economic pillar as an example. What it means is that, and here I address my good friend Jamshid. At the moment, Jamshid is right. We're 10 markets. But if we succeed, by 2015, the 10 markets will become a single market. We will be like the European single market. One single market, one production platform. This is our ambition. And I think we're more or less on track. We may slip a little by a few months, but this is a historic transformation, The merging of 10 individual markets into one single market of 600 million people, I think this is a big thing. And the message to India, to those of you who are in the private sector, is that this is a boost to India. Because now, you can invest in one market instead of 10 markets. There are no transaction costs in going through across national borders. And I think that this is a new economic opportunity for India.
Thank you, Ambassador Ko. Mr. Lamba, there is the economic engagement between India and ASEAN, but we cannot forget to put it within the geopolitical context. And the geopolitical context, as we look at it today, is in a state of flux. It's a whole new world in a way. Would you like to hazard a look into the future about how we could situate the India-ASEAN relationship in the evolving geopolitical context in this region?
I think to do that, it is important to know the areas of concern that we have. That would help us. Which are the areas of concern? You know, there are common concerns, fortunately, whether it is piracy, sea lanes, whether it is climate change, whether it is disaster response, or narcotics, terrorism, or human trafficking. So these are the areas, so our concerns are common. And I think that helps us to go into the future. And what are the areas where we can work together? Maritime is one area where we can work. Then economic cooperation, which already has been talked about. The 3 pillars that were talked about, in all 3 of them, India will have a role to play with us. You know, and economic, cultural, and security.
Mr. Pillai, I will not agree with Ambassador Tomiko as much as I will agree with you. And I think we did over the early decades we did neglect Asia. Now that we are there, we find that there are also 2 big giants. There are the US and China, and we have 2 different narratives, maybe 2 competing narratives. Where would you place the India-ASEAN relationship in this competing narrative?
I feel that India can play a very useful role between these 2 giants, because there are certain strengths that India has. The cultural links that I mentioned is not lost. It can be built upon. So that gives you one link. But more than that, if you look at Singapore, you look at Malaysia, some extent Philippines and Thailand, you find that young Indian professionals have done extremely well in the banking sector, in the IT sector in Singapore. Every other person that you see is probably from India. And Malaysia also, which has got some immigration problems and sort of thing, but even there, when they want a good IT person, they want the banks, the foreign banks bring in large number. So I see the sort of role that India will play is not as a political hegemonist, but as a partner in many of the enterprises. I think what Tommy said about using ASEAN as one market and India, this is already happening. Singapore has become a center for Indian capital to look at other Southeast Asian countries. And this is an excellent move, because you can actually, the connectivity is so good that you can actually do everything from one location, and you can choose. So I do not despair for the future. My point was only time wasted in terms of cultural this. And I accept what Tommy said, if I may just go back to that one point. But what has happened was the Cold War hijacked India's attention, you know, and that was not the right thing to ever happen. That's the only point I'm making. It's not that it's not a disparaging remark, but it's a statement of fact from my point of view.
Mr. Godrej, we have IT, which everybody talks about, but now we see that India's IT is now being rivaled by, say, Philippines, which provides IT services at lower costs. How do you look at the future of economic engagement in ASEAN? What would be, in your view, the new areas of economic engagement in the ASEAN nations?
Yeah. Well, you know, if you see the history of our own IT engagement, we started out with very low-level services, which is where we've had competition from places like the Philippines. But as you move up the value chain, I think that's where India's comparative advantage will lie. So we will have to move up the value chain on IT. But what I see in terms of markets, and especially in consumer goods, is that you know, the ASEAN is not, it's a very local brand conscious market. So each country have their own brands, they have their own way of, and that is actually where India has advantage, because we have similar issues in India. We deal in different states which also have their own strengths in terms of different products, different brands, the way of usage, etc. And I think that's the experience which helps when you work in the different countries in ASEAN. And almost all consumer goods, which are branded, are very local in ASEAN. There's even though you've got big multinationals like Unilever, etc., but every country really has their own strong brands, and that's where we would actually do quite well because A, you have an opportunity to enter the market by acquiring brands. B, you have the experience of doing low-cost work, whether it's in pharmaceuticals or in consumer products, etc. So I think that the similarities are much on an economic, penetration basis. I think where they have been very good is mass manufacturing. I think if you take electronic goods, for instance, okay, even Malaysia attracted a lot of investment in the electronic sector, making chips and doing value-added work from that. I think that's one area which we have not done well in, so we can't really take that out. But I think that the value added, where you can add software to your manufacturing processes, or that has a huge opportunity. And I think on services, we have a good, well-developed banking systems. We have well-developed in other services like insurance, etc. And I think those experiences also of how you develop from a very low base have opportunity in different ASEAN markets. And Tommy's saying that it will be a unified market by 2015, but we're already in 2013, and I don't see that happening in 2 years, because the way that each of these countries works is so different. I don't know if there are contrary views to that, but my personal view is that I don't see it becoming, in that sense, a unified market.
Thank you all. I'd like to open up to the audience. I see Mr. Vajpayee, so Mr. Keshapani afterwards.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. How can anyone possibly quarrel with such charming and able visitors? I have no intention of doing that, but may I qualify what both of them said? And that is that the cultural ties that Ambassador Koh stressed did not prevent us from being on opposite sides of the world problems of the time. We in India have had a historic connection also with West Asia, and Ambassador Pillay asked whether we had not overstressed that at the expense of. The fact of the matter is that we Indians are a very inward-looking people, if not totally obsessed with ourselves. We don't look very much to outside world, but we did have a greater consciousness of West Asia, largely because of our Islamic connections. And you will know how much India was involved in things like the Khilafat movement. So there was an awareness of the West to a far greater degree than of the East. Secondly, and this I think is what I really want to lead up to, let's not forget that there was a global situation in which we found ourselves with different points of view. You talked about the Cold War, but it was really the presence of a power that did not welcome India's links with East Asia. And I don't want to go to the history of it all, and now we are very good friends all around, but let's not forget the amount of mischief about India that was spread all over Southeast Asia, where newspapers were fed all kinds of stories about us as being stooges of the Soviet Union, etc. Well, the point I'm trying to make is that we were the victims then of the global situation. Now the global situation has changed, and one of the reasons we are able to deal with each other is what divided us then is no longer there. But is there something else that unites us more? And here I would like our friends from Singapore, and indeed our own people, to remember that there is still a power that does not welcome our close relations with ASEAN countries. And how are the two of us going to deal with that? I do believe that the future of our relationship will depend as much on what is called the geopolitical centers of gravity, as it will on our bilateral or mutual efforts. And I think we need to think very carefully on how we will tackle what will be the global situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vajpayee. Mr. Keshapani.
Madam Chair, it was not only Pandit Nehru who had this vision. It was not only Pandit Nehru who had this vision, but earlier, Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore himself in 1927, visiting Bali, exclaimed, "I see India everywhere, but do not recognize it," because Indian culture had been transformed. But the point I want to take up, and here I would reluctantly have to agree with Gopinath. I normally don't choose one or the other. Today I have to. Because apart from culture, the one area where India also neglected Southeast Asia was in the peoples to peoples contact. Indians in particular were totally ignored. Unlike the Chinese, who kept up the overseas Chinese connection all along, until about 10 years ago, there was not even a Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs. And until a few years ago, there was no such thing as an OIC card or a PIO card. While there was this continuity in the Chinese side, there was nothing. We stopped short, more or less, after independence. The Southeast Asian Indians were left to fend for themselves. And this had tremendous implications, particularly in Malaysia, in some other parts of the world. Again, you did not build on the culture. Again, let me look at a Chinese example. All over Southeast Asia, in fact, more than that, there are Confucius institutes today spreading Chinese thought, Chinese culture. Is there something similar? Is there less of a heritage that India cannot transport? We have been asking, what about Vivekananda's thoughts, Ramakrishna's thoughts, Gandhi's thoughts? In India, there is a building now called the Gandhi Memorial Hall, which is more known for non-existence than existence. And nothing virtually happens. But this is one part of Indian cultural diplomacy we in Southeast Asia, including Singapore, would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keshapani. I think that there remains a debate about whether Indian and the Confucius Institute certainly as a sort of projection of Chinese soft power as China wants to project it. I think as maybe somebody would tell you that Indians like to live their soft power, and I don't think the two systems are comparable in that sense. Ambassador Preet Malik. Yes, of course. Just a moment. I think I think here, right here.
Thank you. Let me first of all take up the points that you have, and I think in a sense they have been further kind of strengthened as far as the implications are concerned. I would put it slightly differently. As far as what was raised about the Indian or people of Indian origin and the lack of, let's say, understanding or approach from the Indian side, I think there is a reason behind that. And the reason is that there was a period in time when we had to take a decision as to how we were going to look at people of Indian origin, whether they would be dealt with as a lot of them wanted to be, as Indians, or whether we would sort of follow what Nehru had put forward, which is that people, wherever they are, should become citizens of that place and function in that way. But there's another aspect to this, and I'll mention it because I realized this when I was High Commissioner in Malaysia, that one of the problems was that most of the people of Indian origin, the bulk, come from the southern part or came from the southern part of India. And unfortunately, most of the people who dealt with them came from the northern part of India. And there were always gaps. And these gaps have been filled to some extent, but these gaps still remain. I think this is one of the things that as Indians, we have to, as responsible Indians, we should at least accept that we haven't done what we should have done. And the reason for that was that I think there is a gap in thinking on the Indian side. The other aspect of it was the Nehruvian period started off by looking at Asia, very rightly as Ambassador Tomiko put it. But I think he lost out. It was not merely a case of the Fabian socialist attitude or looking west by itself, because that was the easier part of it. But I think he lost interest, in a manner of speaking, because after Bandung, he found that it was not going the way he would like it to go. His ideas, his thoughts were not the ones that really mattered in that sense of the term. So I think it was very much that, and I've seen enough of the situation that developed between India and Burma at that time, or with Malaysia. And I do remember that when I called on the Tunku, he raised it with me. And I had a bit of a tough time trying to explain to him that we did not fail him. It was perhaps just the period of time that we ended up in that condition. But the question that has remained, in a sense, totally unanswered, and no one in the panel, except for the early mention of the US pivot, there's nothing that really has emerged out of the discussion so far. And I'm really quite interested, because I think this will be a game changer in case the Americans are serious. I'm not saying that they are not serious. I'm not saying that what they have so far done or have stated is actually serious. But assuming that, given the sort of circumstances which seem to be making them look in that direction, how will India and ASEAN, I mean, I know what I can think as an Indian, what we would like to see and what we would not like to see. I have seen a certain amount of what ASEAN countries seem to be saying. But there is a degree of understanding that you have always had with the United States. That understanding, will it become deeper? If it becomes deeper, what happens to constructive engagement, which I think was the policy that the much maligned Mahathir Mohamad had put forward. Is that going to be lost out? What is going to happen to your economic relationships, as not just ASEAN, but as individual Southeast Asian countries? Because a considerable amount of your product goes as a component into China, for instance. So what will this pivot actually mean, both in terms of the economic side and the political side and the security side?
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Malik. Ambassador Ko, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think it's important for me to explain the ASEAN countries' worldview and what is our strategy. The leaders of ASEAN are almost unique in the world. I can think of no other region of the world in which the leaders actually proactively tell the great powers that we want you to be stakeholders in the stability and prosperity of our region. We want to be linked to you economically. We want you to help us maintain peace and security in our region. We are unique. And as a result of this, when we have our annual meeting, whether at foreign ministers level or at the head of government level, after the foreign ministers met, we have a meeting at the ministerial level of the ASEAN Regional Forum, where all the extra-regional countries that have a stake in the security of Asia-Pacific are invited to join the forum. At the end of the annual summit, we have a meeting of ASEAN plus the leaders of China, Japan, and Korea in a format called ASEAN plus 3. And then we have a meeting with a larger grouping, the East Asia Summit, that includes India, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Russia. Our attitude is that it's not a zero-sum game. We can be a friend of India without alienating China. We can be a friend of America without antagonizing China. We can be a friend of Japan without antagonizing China. We are a friend of all. We want everybody to have a seat at our top table. We want everybody to have a stake in our peace, our stability, and our prosperity. And so we have been proactive in negotiating, for example, free trade agreement or comprehensive economic partnership agreement with all these countries I mentioned, with China. And I'm happy to say that our negotiations with India have just been completed. We have, after 9 years, completed our agreement on services and investment. We have completed an agreement on goods with Japan and not yet on investment and services. We have an agreement with Australia and New Zealand. We are talking to the European Union, and I suspect the European Union will soon offer us a negotiation for EU's ASEAN FTA. You know? So we don't see that we have to choose. You know? And our ambition is to embed all these extra regional powers that have a stake in Southeast Asia to join in these different forums and institutions to address our common interests and to learn the culture of cooperating with each other.
I think sir, and then Mr. Pathan. No.
Me?
No. The gentleman behind you, sir.
Okay. Professor Ghoshal.
I'm Professor Ghoshal. Now, undoubtedly, culture binds India and Southeast Asia. But I was looking at it from a different point of view. This culture is grounded only with a particular generation of people, the older generation. In Southeast Asia today, 60% of the people are below 40 years. Now, amongst this group of people, I don't think these cultural things are known. Majority of the Southeast Asians don't know anything about India, particularly amongst this older generation. I was giving a talk in Jakarta at an Islamic university, and one of the students stood up and asked me after the lecture, "Do you have Muslims in India?" Now, that is the kind of knowledge that younger generation have about India. Now, my point of view is that culture today has to be redefined, not in terms of those rituals and other things. Younger generation's culture is education, Facebook, IT, and a whole lot of other things. And it is at this level that we have to really develop our links, people-to-people links. Now, one of the things that Mr. Pillai had also mentioned that in Southeast Asia today, in most of the countries, in the corporate sector, you see large number of Indians who are working as bankers, accountants, and a whole lot of other professions. I think some of these people could be utilized as a kind of medium through which we can develop our contacts with the younger generation. And the second thing is education. That's one thing that we have neglected. We have always thought in terms of culture being dance, drama, and all that. But the kind of educational things that we could have really developed, the linkages with Southeast Asian countries, that has been ignored. We could have invited many of the students to come and study in our universities. The editor of Jakarta Post, a few months back when I met him in Jakarta, he told me a very interesting story. He said because of this problem with the United States in terms of inviting Muslim students to come and study there, in another 5 years' time, number of Indonesian students going to study in China will outnumber the number of students going to the whole of West. Now, these younger students will study in China. They will come back and occupy some of the critical positions, both in the corporate sector as well as in the government. So I think some of these things need to be noted, that our cultural linkages today should not just be on those Borobudur and other kinds of things. It has to be related to the younger generation of people. And the last point, I'm sorry, just one point that I wanted to mention. I don't think there is much, there is any lack of ideological kind of similarities. But ideology don't bind all the time. It is the economic links that bind. You know, the whole of 50s, there was great anti-colonialism, anti-racialism, Nehru and all that kind of thing. But that could not sustain essentially because our economic links with Southeast Asia were minuscule. I think if India has to really play an important role in the region and has to be on the wavelength, our economic engagements have to really increase with this region. And I think today's leadership, Indian leadership, is a socialist background. They have no stake in entrepreneurial things. I think we need to have a different kind of an elite to think in terms of business. And even if we talk about business, we are notorious in terms of not implementing things. So I think some of those cultural outlooks also need to be changed. And the third thing is that, I mean, we can't really talk about India-ASEAN in the absence of Indonesia and Vietnam. I mean, of course, this panel is a different one, but I think their point of view needs to be taken into consideration.
Thank you, Professor Ghoshal. Mr. Parthasarathy.
Ambassador Koh, we all recognize the salient role that Singapore had to play, quite distinct from whatever was the cultural ethos 2,000 years ago in our contemporary relations with ASEAN. You were the driving force between where we have reached with ASEAN. But when I go to Singapore, I hear this argument. Who do you think had a greater role to play in this, Lee Kuan Yew or Goh Chok Tong? And my answer was that Lee Kuan Yew provided the vision, but Goh Chok Tong turned it into a reality. So that is I would like your views on that. But more importantly, two questions. One, we have acknowledged the centrality of ASEAN. And very frankly, you will find when that ASEAN doesn't hold together, we'll go along with what you have to say. But how can we deal with the centrality of ASEAN when ASEAN is itself so divided on the South China Sea? I mean, we saw that in Cambodia. We saw that earlier, and we'll perhaps see it in Myanmar when they assumed the chairmanship of ASEAN. So my first question is, how do we deal with this? It is a serious problem because, let's face it, even in India, 2005, when Jiabao comes here and signs an agreement which would have sealed the border, and then a year later they become much more assertive. I mean, do you see that as a passing phase in China or their own internal dynamics? And the second question, we've heard a lot about the pivot which Hillary Clinton proclaimed. But in Obama Mark II, they're turning back to the Atlantic. They're talking of the transatlantic relationship, and that for the next 5 years, Asia can wait its turn, but we're going to look at the Atlantic. So, the Americans change strategic policies as fast as we change our shirts. But what do you see about that? How is it going to affect the Hillary Clinton pivot? Is that interest going to continue? And how does this play out on the differences which so many of your members have with China on the South China Sea?
Ambassador, I think you get to...
Okay, very tough question, right?
Do you want to take a...
maybe Gopi can answer Professor Ghoshal. Okay, let me answer two questions. I'll be very frank and say that ASEAN's future is at stake. ASEAN's future is on the line. ASEAN cannot play the kind of role we have in the past as the convener, facilitator of these regional groupings if ASEAN becomes disunited. The South China Sea is only one example, and I think that we will be facing more tests in the years to come. The 10 member countries of ASEAN have different preferences vis-a-vis the great powers. Some of them are pro-China, some of them are pro-America, some of them are pro-Japan, some of them are pro-China, some of them are pro-India. The fundamental point I want to make to ourselves, not to you, is that if ASEAN does not remain united, if ASEAN does not remain independent, then we do not have a bright future. Then we will gradually lose the central role we play as the convener and facilitator of these regional institutions. And this is a real challenge. I share with you my worry that if we are not wise, if we allow ourselves to be divided, if we decide to align ourselves with one of the great powers, then we can no longer play this role.
Thank you, Ambassador. I will let Mr. Godrej answer Professor Ghoshal.
On the economic front, I think you're absolutely correct that the type of consumer who is there today is very different than what the consumer was earlier. I think they've been exposed, like consumers in India, they've been exposed to the world. They've seen what's happening, and they're restless. And so I think that your point is well taken, that if we don't address their needs, the culture, is not going to solve that problem. So the way we can manage that basically is to encourage more trade and investment. I mean, that contact, as you mentioned, that the contact between peoples from India and peoples from all the different countries of Southeast Asia has been very, very weak. I think we still, except for one or two places, and I think that that's one way to engage. I think buying brands, getting more engaged through those brands, I think that will bring us much closer to younger consumers. But I think there's no alternative to this type of building on tourism as well as on business contacts. Tourism is actually one of the best ways to do it. I mean, Indians love to go shopping in Singapore. I don't know if that's still driving the Singaporean economy, but I mean that there is huge opportunity for tourism, which I don't think that we are doing enough about.
Because there are not enough connecting flights between India and ASEAN countries. And I think that if I may make an appeal to you, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh many years ago proposed that there should be an open skies agreement between India and ASEAN. The ASEAN side have embraced this vision, but we're not implementing it. And the problem is on your side, And I think it's to your detriment, because if there were more connecting flights between India and ASEAN, there'll be millions of tourists from Southeast Asia coming to India.
Thank you. My name is Yogendra Kumar. I'm former ambassador to the Philippines. Taking on the point made by Ambassador Parsarthi, what I wanted to ask you really is that when you're looking at the future of India-ASEAN ties, and it is anchored in ASEAN being in the driving seat as far as the economic and security and security and political architecture, how it's being driven forward. Now, when you have the problem arising with the South China Sea and the tensions there, which actually seem to be rising, and therefore leading to this kind of lack of cohesion that you mentioned. So here the issue seems to be that whilst you have on one side, let's say, the rebalancing, but that is more security and that sort of thing, whereas the locomotion for the economic resurgence and drive actually is located still, it arises from China. My question really is that you're also talking, of course, a very good thing that you're thinking in terms of FTAs with various countries, ASEAN as a whole, and all the other major economic powers. To add to that, when you're negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which actually is not sort of with ASEAN as a whole, but some countries in ASEAN, to what extent would that lead to this kind of lack of cohesion that you actually alluded to, and its likely impact on the entire conceptual framework of ASEAN as a whole? Thank you.
I will. Okay, I'll take that as the last question, then I'll put closing remarks on everybody.
This is Suhas Borkar from CFTV News. Now, I had a point, you say there on the board, road ahead for India-ASEAN ties. I want to talk about the road itself. the physical connectivity. Now, that's not coming through. There've been, we've been talking about it for more than 15 years now, and nothing seems to be moving. And that's critical. If you want economic ties, if you want people movement, you can take flights, sir. But, many of our people can't afford to take flights right across. So the people-to-people road, that's critical. Thank you.
Absolutely correct, Mr. Borkar. And I think the deadline on physical connectivity, or rather land connectivity, has been shifting and has been extending. And I think we now hear 2016, but we won't hold our breath on that. But thank you all for all the questions. I'd like to just ask the panelists to make their closing remarks. I will turn around. So, Mr. Godrej, it's your turn.
Okay. Well, I think that this last point on the road is actually a very, very important and critical thing. I think that both the road and railway connections, and I think, we were talking of historical links. The Silk Road was doing that at one time. That was many decades ago. And so my feeling is that building infrastructure, throughout ASEAN and India, and then connecting it through India again to Central Asia, and recreating the old Silk Road is one of the best ways, I think, to build peace and economic development in the region. India was at the hub. It exported a lot of culture. It exported religion. Buddhism went from India. So I think, that yes, we have all that, but we can't live on it. And as the professor correctly said, it's a completely different dynamic today. So if we could get this, all these ideas on connectivity, whether it's by road or rail or air, if we could make sure that the markets really are free all along without barriers, and if we could make sure that people can travel easily in a relatively visa-free type of, then I think you're creating all the right conditions for this road ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Pillai.
Well, let me just take that point on connectivity, and just to mention the fact that we have an institute called Institute of South Asian Studies, with which I'm associated. We have had a meeting in Delhi, and we are starting a study on Northeast India, and its connectivity to ASEAN through Myanmar and so on, that we will be doing. On the question of tourism, I think what Tommy mentioned about the open skies, I think is something that needs to be taken seriously, because there's tremendous potential for tourists, and people-to-people interaction can actually help to build greater understanding and make up for many of the other shortfalls that you have. But Professor Ghoshaal's point that unless you have strong economic relations, nothing else works. I think this is true. One of the big questions, you look at Japan. At one time, Japan was the major investor in Southeast Asia. And a lot of people sent their children to Japan to study. Japanese management model was supposed to be the best and so on. But suddenly that has all changed. Now it is China, because China invests heavily into ASEAN. And unless India is able to come in to invest in ASEAN, I think it will be much tougher road ahead.
Thank you. Ambassador Lamba.
Well, the topic of our discussion was road ahead. I think we spent a lot of time in discussing our past. Of course, it's a very important past. We went only up to 1927. We could have gone for centuries also. But I think I would take that as a plus point and go ahead and how we can have important cultural contacts for the future. Second is the economic cooperation. I think that is the most significant aspect that can take us together. In Singapore alone today, we have over 5,000 Indian firms. And
6,
just now,
6,000.
Well, now it's 6,000. The last figure we had was 5,400. But over 6,000, even better. And as Gopi was just mentioning, that there should be Indian investment in. We have today heard of a very modern Indian steel plant in Singapore, made by the Tata, that steel. Which, so there are many Indian investments that people don't know about and are working very well and efficiently. I think we need to increase these. Connectivity came up during the closing stages of our discussion, and I think it's the most important aspect if we have to see the road ahead. You know, whether it is the trilateral highway or the other connections between India and Laos and Cambodia, because what we need is a seamless connection, both air, rail, road, and digital, which will help us in our journey ahead.
Last remarks to Ambassador.
Okay. Okay, 3 remarks. First, I acknowledge that our future cannot be based upon history and heritage alone, and that we have to make this history and heritage meaningful to the young people. I accept that to many young people in Southeast Asia, they know nothing about the past and are not really interested. So I think to remedy this, we should encourage more students from the ASEAN countries to study in India. You know, there are very few students from ASEAN countries studying in India, in your elite institution. We should find opportunities for young students from ASEAN countries and youth leaders to spend time in India on attachments or for short working stints with Indian companies. This is something we can do and we should do. My second point is that in this relationship between India and ASEAN, when our leaders meet, they commit themselves to very visionary ideals. They commit themselves to all kinds of wonderful ideas which are never implemented. And my appeal to my Indian friends is that can you please do something about this gap between what your leaders commit themselves to doing and your inability to deliver them. I don't know what the problem is, and please don't be offended in me. Don't be offended by me. But there is this gap, you know, between commitment made by Indian leaders at the highest level and the inability of the Indian system to deliver them. Yeah. So my third point is that this... My third point. You said only 2. No, 3. my third point is again appeal to India. We want this relationship between India and ASEAN to be a two-way street. No? We want Indian investment in ASEAN, Indian talent in ASEAN, but we also want ASEAN investment in India, ASEAN talent in India. And not enough of this is happening. Why? I think there are problems on your side. India must make a determined effort to jettison the old protectionist mindset which still lingers here. India must make a bold commitment to structural reform and the opening of the Indian market to the world. India must convince your own people that you can compete with the world. You have nothing to fear. Look at your great companies and how well they've done in Asia, in Europe. So, you know, my appeal to India is don't be afraid of the world. Don't protect your vested interests. Open up India. Welcome to the world to India as the world is welcoming India to the world. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for being such a patient and such an attentive audience. And I think the interaction was of very, very high order. Good evening, and thank you.